Hello everyone, how y'all doing? So I'm recording this video because I want to make the point that you don't hate ray tracing enough. Now recently, Resident Evil Requiem came out, and to be clear, I'm not here to rant about the game. It looks pretty good actually. I actually do have the disc version, so maybe one of these days I'll, grab some time to actually play this. But I do want to complain about something about the game that I will say, it's an issue that I've had for a while when it comes to ray tracing because initially when ray tracing first became a thing, something that people very quickly noticed was the fact that in general, ray tracing didn't seem to look that much better compared to a fully rasterized game, simply due to the fact that and granted, this is mainly with ray tracing. With path tracing, I do think that the difference was a bit more noticeable. But with ray tracing, when the games just simply had like ray trace shadows and lighting or everything like that, like a lot of the times when you compare to the option with no ray tracing, especially with a lot of the early games, it was pretty noticeable the fact that there really wasn't a lot of difference. Like I remember playing was it like Ghost Runner or something like that. I enabled ray tracing, and quite literally the only difference I noticed was the fact that like half of my frames were gone. You know what I mean? Like that was the only notable difference that I noticed, was that the game was just running a lot worse. But beyond that, I didn't really seem like I was getting that much better graphics. It's not that you couldn't notice, it's that the difference was pretty negligible and it didn't really make up for the cost of actually running this piece of tech. And to be honest with you, nowadays the impression that I'm getting doesn't seem to be all that different. In fact, the only difference that I'm noticing right now is that I'm starting to see a lot more games that have like mandatory ray tracing, and so you don't even really have the option to disable it. I believe Indiana Jones is one of the games where it actually has like mandatory ray tracing, just because the overall, pretty much all aspects of the rendering graphics pipelines or just have ray tracing baked into all of it. So you don't even really have an option to disable it. But then you also have some games where you technically can disable ray tracing, but when you do so, the game just basically looks bad. And this is an example of it, where when you disable ray tracing, the game just has very subpar lighting, very subpar, just this to me just looks bad. Like this shot here of the car, and granted, you could maybe say that this is like an uncharitable shot, but to be honest with you, like there's this one shot in specific. I think, yeah, this is the one where it's like, you look at, and let me fucking mute the audio here. You look at Grace here. It's like she just, and actually this isn't even in the worst shot. There's one in specific that actually looks even worse than this. And in general, it just, Grace here just looks like this to me. When I look at this, it looks like an alpha build. It looks like the game in alpha where they still need to like add in some additional like shading into the overall assets in order to make the game look more complete. And funny thing is, I look at path tracing, and the only difference I'm noticing is that Grace just looks younger. I don't even think this looks better than the ray tracing option, but you know that's just the overall impression. And I mean, here there's no reflection at all, and so, and like nowadays we're now supposed to like pretend like if you don't have ray tracing, then it just has no shadows and no reflections, because to be honest with you, that's sort of the impression that I'm getting here. And the one thing that really concerns me about this current direction is that, to me, it just kind of feels like, a lot of, and I don't know if it's intentional, but like, to me, it just kind of feels like they're creating this sort of like revisionist narrative where people will look at games like this and they're gonna think that ray tracing is important to have, it's important to enable, but in large part because the non ray tracing option has been so severely dumbed down, because at the end of the day, what we're seeing here is not reflective of every game that rely on pure raster. Like, when you look at games released for the fourth generation, and even some games released for the, wait, did I say fourth? Sorry, I meant the eighth generation, as well as even some games that are released for the ninth generation. It's like they don't all look so severely watered down when you disable ray tracing. This, and honestly, even the ray tracing option doesn't seem like like I've seen games that don't have path tracing and only rely on ray tracing that has better reflections than this. And so I don't know. To me, the impression that I'm now getting is that the current direction that we're seeing with a lot of video games is that nowadays it just feels like the non ray tracing and even potentially some non path tracing options are just gonna look watered down. And I don't know. That to me feels to me it kind of feels scummy because this is something that I because honestly I think a lot of people unfortunately are probably not going to see this as a problem, and that's mainly due to the fact that many people, when the whole ray tracing and path tracing craze started to become a thing, like around 2018, I believe it was 2018, I'm not entirely sure. But basically, when the first generation of RTX cards came out, a lot of people bought those cards under the expectation that their investment into these graphics cards that were now pioneering this ray tracing technology would eventually pay off. That ray tracing was the future. One day we're going to see games rely on ray tracing and it's going to like revolutionize what we expect from video game graphics. But it's like I look at this, like I look at the game with path tracing, it looks like a normal game. You know what I mean? Like when a game when a game has these like ray tracing and path tracing features, it just looks like a normal game. Like if you really want to see an example of a game that's revolutionizing graphics, you look at something like fucking Body Cam, you know. Um uh a game like this, and there's one footage in specific that I wanted to show, but I don't think I have it with me. But like, this is probably not even the best showcase. I mean, even these shots here, like this is oh, I think there's also Unrecord. This isn't out yet. There's like a Steam listing, but there's no game available yet. We don't even know if this game is ever gonna get released. But like, this to me is an example of a game that actually does feel like it's revolutionizing graphics. Like, I very rarely see games that look this scaringly close to realism. Like, you could actually fool people into believing that this is real life. This, on the other hand, again, it just looks like a normal game. And granted, I'm not complaining that the game looks normal. You're allowed to look like a normal game, but I don't think that, like, because I don't know if this video shows benchmarks, but like this one in specific, I believe, because I saw this video earlier. Like when you look at the frame rate, like look at this. The game without ray tracing, 108 FPS. I don't know which graphics cards he's using. The fucking 4090. What is this? 4K? I hope it's 4K. I really hope it's 4K. But like, yeah, 108 FPS without ray tracing, 51 FPS with ray tracing, and 17 FPS with path tracing. Like, for the game to look normal, it has to run at 17 FPS. Does that make sense to you? Like, does that look like does that seem normal to you? Because this to me is not normal. And it gets to the point where that's when you then have to rely on things like DLSS, you have to rely on frame generation, which in my opinion are not things that you should be relying at all. But that's what these technologies end up forcing you to do. It forces you to use compromising technologies that oftentimes are, pioneered by the likes of Nvidia, and they end up having an advantage over the vendors because they started doing this. They started doing research on this way before AMD, Intel, and even Sony, now that they have PSSR. So they have a heads up. And so to me, just like, I don't know, this feels very intentional in my opinion. This feels like artificial novelty. And now it just feels like, in the past, there was no reason to enable ray tracing. So now we're just going to give you a reason to enable ray tracing by simply making the non-ray tracing option unusable. Like, I don't know, that's the impression. And again, I don't think like Capcom did this intentionally, because I don't think they would benefit by ruining the experience, because at the end of the day, this is something that eventually is going to affect all of us, because for starters, not every GPU has ray tracing accelerators. Like a lot of older cards, that many of which could still very much be used today, like the 5700, they don't have ray tracing accelerators. Like, I don't even know if they would have the features to enable ray tracing, and so their only option is this, which in my opinion is not a very good. I mean, it doesn't look like horrible necessarily. Like, like this shot in specific, it looks fine. Like, I can probably play it. Like, to me, it's more concerning when you see like this. When you see this, like this shot here, like now we're supposed to pretend like, ray tracing and path tracing invented good lighting with cars, as if this didn't exist, as if Need for Speed 2015 is not a thing. We're not supposed to pretend like they created this and before you couldn't get this. I don't know. Feels very intentional. But beyond the fact that not every GPU has ray tracing accelerators, but you also have to consider the fact that like these pieces of technology that require you to have dedicated hardware to even run these. Like, you need dedicated accelerators built into the actual GPU in order to run these pieces of technologies. You have to wonder, like, what's going to happen in the future when GPUs start to not have these accelerators, which I don't know if that's going to happen, but like, who knows? Like, I mean, in my eyes, this to me feels like artificial novelty. And so what's going to happen in the future when, these vendors are going to want to push other tech, and I don't know, maybe they might start to sacrifice some of the dedicated ray tracing hardware. Maybe they might start to water down in order to make space for, other piece of tech. It's like, I mean, last year, when the Blackwell generation came out, they no longer had support for 32-bit physics. And that essentially meant that older gens, graphics cards that, were objectively less powerful than some of the GPUs found with the Blackwell lineup, were actually performing better when you had physics enabled. And even then, like, people did make fun of NVIDIA for that, but like, I'll tell you one thing, at least with a lot of those older 32-bit games that had physics, you could disable them. And usually when you disabled physics, the game still looked perfectly fine. But nowadays, if this is supposed to be the future, where like the non-ray tracing option just doesn't look good, like this is a perfect shot. Like, there's such a clear like downgrade, like to the point where it am I just supposed to pretend like I need ray tracing for a character to look like this? Like, am I just supposed to pretend like the past decades of video game graphics are just suddenly ignored? You know what I mean? Like, and again, like, what if we get to a future where these hardware vendors don't want to focus on ray tracing accelerators and supporting that anymore? Then our only option is going to be this. And I don't know, maybe there's going to be some kind of like software based solution for running these ray trace games, but like, but again, is it gonna become the same situation as we're seeing with NVIDIA physics, where it's just gonna look bad because you're using software rendering? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't see this as a good thing. Like, I do not see a world where this current direction is good, especially when at the end of the day, I don't even think that ray tracing or path tracing are doing a whole heck of a lot to actually revolutionize the way we're playing. To me, it just feels like, like, and I have heard from that some developers actually prefer ray tracing because just the overall the ray tracing algorithm, from what I understand, is a little bit easier to work with compared to traditional rasterization, and I do respect that. And I would understand that, but like, to me, relying on a piece of technology that just depends on vendor, like, when it's so heavily dependent on the vendors actually putting in the acceleration necessary to make this work, it I don't really see how this is gonna benefit us in the future. Like, I don't see it. Like, personally speaking, like, this to me just feels very wrong. But I don't know, maybe it's just me, maybe some of y'all might have a different opinion, but like, personally speaking, I just feel like this generation specific of video games, one of the biggest disappointments has mainly been with ray tracing and path tracing, and how much they're pushing this to be like the next big thing. Because at least so far, I've been mostly very disappointed by what we've been seeing. I like Let's go to Minecraft. Minecraft path tracing. Yeah, let's open this video from Digital Foundry. Um, Not a very charitable. Let's look at shots from the outside. Mm, there's a lot of interior shots. I want shots from the outside. Come on, Digital Foundry. Let's look at this. You know, so far, this is the only example of path tracing that I found to be worth it. And it's in fucking Minecraft. Every other game, I don't see the appeal. And that's just my personal perspective. I've been very vocal about the fact that I'm not really a fan of this technology. I think that the cost of running them doesn't make up for the end results that you're getting. And if it gets to the point where only one game, in my opinion, is actually worth enabling ray tracing, then maybe this technology is not as good as it's hyped up to be. But I don't know. That's just my opinion, and yeah, that's all. That's the end of my rant.